Today's stuff we're going to learn is Nidarim Daf Tet. Today's stuff is sponsored by Leslie and Don Nadel, the refuah shlema of Don's brother Al, Eliyahu Shlomo ben Zisarisa, who's undergoing brain cancer treatment. Okay, we're going to get started with the top of our daf from a Mishnah. Mishnah is going to be a very complicated Mishnah. Usually Mishnayot are reasonably easy to understand. This one's going to be quite complicated. I'm not going to get into, but one should know that you can actually read Safrai on the Mishnah. In Mishnah Eretz Yisrael, which, as I've mentioned before, you can find on Sefaria, it's in Hebrew, but he talks about different parallel, how the Tosefta has this, and different approaches in the Yerushalmi versus the Bavli, as it's as expected, as it's a very complicated Mishnah, and therefore there's various interpretations, different versions, etc. But we're going to go with how the Bavli understands it, because that's what we're learning. And we'll read the Mishnah, and then remember the Gemara is going to explain it in a particular way. It doesn't necessarily mean this is the only way the Mishnah can be explained. Kinidre Rishaim. And with that, we're also going to go with certain commentaries on how to understand the Mishnah. So that's also, this is commentary on the Mishnah of the Gemara, and then commentary of the Gemara by other commentaries. So all of that leads to there are multiple interpretations. Kinidre Rishaim. I said I'm taking on a vow like wicked people. Okay, a little bit strange why you would do that. I don't know why you would say such a thing. But if you were to say such a thing, it's valid according to the Mishnah, Nadar b'nazir u'b'korban u'b'shvua. You took a vow to be a Nazir, to give a korban and an oath. What on earth does that mean? Different interpretations, as I've mentioned, but based on Shmuel and the way he understands the Gemara, going forward, I'm going to already explain how Shmuel reads this Mishnah, because otherwise it's very hard to read as a simple reading. So he understands this as Nadar b'nazir u'b'korban. He basically can take on, using this language, either, okay, then we're going to interpret like this, either Nazirut, to be a Nazir, or a korban, a sacrifice, or an oath. Now, how would you know? So Shmuel says it must be that there's some object in front of him, or a person in front, or something like that, which we'll see later, but basically, let's say there's food in front of him, so or in her. So that means I'm taking on an oath not to eat it. And Shmuel's going to have to explain, because of certain difficulties, it must be the heat, that there were some more added words here that aren't really mentioned in the Mishnah. Otherwise, it wouldn't really be clear what you mean. So we'll talk about that soon. If you remember Shmuel in the first Mishnah, where it said, Mudrani mimcha, and then Shani ochel lecha, he said you have to put those two together. If you don't put them together, it doesn't really make any sense, and it's not clear that you actually mean a vow. It's going to be the same kind of idea here. If you don't add some sort of other word at the end, then we have no idea what you're talking about. So it would have to be, let's just give the example of a Nazir. Again, we'll see this more inside after, but a Nazir is passing by, and then you add some other word, and then, that's it. Okay, so you're asking about the book I mentioned earlier, so I'll remind you. It's called Mishnat Eretz Yisrael. Here's the actual book. Okay, it's a physical book. It appears on Sefaria. If you go on the Mishnah, you can look at Mishnah, Masechet Nidarim. It might even be part of the first Mishnah, I think. I think it's one long Mishnah that's split up in the Gemara, but you find the Mishnah there. You click on it. It says commentaries, and within the commentary section, you'll see Mishnat Eretz Yisrael. Okay, it's by Safrai, and that's what you're looking for. Unfortunately, it's only in Hebrew. Maybe one day they'll translate it. What the Mishnat Eretz Yisrael does is it compares. It tries to do a more academic study on the Mishnayot by bringing all different sources, like how the approach of the Bavli versus the approach of the Yerushalmi, what appears in the Tosefta, which is a more parallel source to the Mishnah. So it's very interesting. Okay, so now if you say like the Nidarim of the wicked people, so now it's actually a little bit tricky what we mean by the Nidarim of the wicked people. We're going to see basically that we talked about this already. Mostly the people who take vows are not good people. Okay, they're not motivated by the right things. Okay, we'll get to this a little bit later. So basically, it's valid either for Nazirut or for Korban or for Shvua. Some people think somehow this sentence is read as you've taken upon yourself all three, and how they interpret it, that's a whole different explanation. But I'll put that aside right now. Kinidrei ksherim. If you say like the neder of a good person, okay, like kasher, kosher, something's good, sometimes we use it not just to mean kosher food, but if you say like the Koran translated like the virtuous people, lo amar klum. So it sounds like there is no such thing as a vow of a virtuous person. Bin nidvotam, but if you say, like the nidavot, how exactly translate nidavot is a good question. I saw in the Koran they translate as gift offering. Nidava usually means you volunteer something. Okay, so I would think of more as a voluntary offering. Nadar ben Nazir ubekorban. Now notice there's one thing missing here. Shavua is not here. And that's because an oath is never taken with the language of nidava, but you could take upon yourself nizirut or a sacrifice as a nidava. And if you say like the nidava of the virtuous people, that there is such a thing. So we're going to have to understand, it's not clear from the Mishnah, why we're distinguishing between neder and nidava. The general, usually we use the terms neder and nidava, the most popular are when it comes to bringing a sacrifice. And the difference between them is a language thing, and not just language. There's importance to the language, but it definitely doesn't seem to split into the split that we would make here, which is good people don't take vows in the language of a neder, but they do in the language of a nidava. Okay, it's going to be a little bit strange why they do that. And the Gemara is going to try to figure out what's the reason here. But generally, when we talk about neder and nidava, and so again, in the English translation, you would say vow or gift offering or voluntary offering. But the question is, when it comes to, let's say, the world of sacrifices, that's usually where we have neder and nidava. And I talked about this earlier in the Masechet. A neder is saying, this animal is on me, meaning I will bring this animal to the temple. I'm sorry, a nidava, my mistake. And neder is saying, is hare alai. 1 minute now, I'm confused because it really would be, I have this right. Why did I get this? 1 second. Let me just think about this in my head for a minute. Right. Nidava is hare zo, and neder is hare alai. So neder is hare alai. I'm taking it upon myself. This is difficult because we said that's why I'm getting confused. Because normally we say neder is on the object. But I guess in the difference between neder and nidava, I said this 1 second. Just double check something. Because in this context, we're going to definitely say that nidava is on the animal itself. Right. Okay. So I might have said neder. Neder generally is on the object, but in a case of a neder and nidava by korban, it's actually the opposite. I must have made a mistake earlier in the Masechet when I said it. We were talking about the difference between neder and shvua, and then I was giving an example of sacrifices, but actually the language, if neder versus shvua, if you're taking a vow, the vow is on the object. If you're taking a shvua, it's I will bring. But even within neder, if you talk about in sacrifice world, neder and nidava, neder is hare alai. I accept upon myself, which means basically you're going to be responsible. If the animal gets lost, you're going to have to bring another one instead. And nidava is hare zo. Okay, you're saying this animal, and therefore if something happens to the animal, you're no longer responsible. So now we're going to see somehow they're distinguishing between nidrei ksherim, there's no such thing, or at least your statement is not going to be valid, but nidvot ksherim, there is such a thing. And then you'll be a nazir or have to bring a sacrifice. So we finished this Mishnah, but it's quite unclear what's going on here, and we're going to have the Gemara to try to figure this out. And like I said, the Gemara is the Bavli's take on this, but there might be the Bavli's take. There might be other ways to understand. So first, the Gemara says, "V'dilma hachikama." Maybe this is what we say. Kinidre rishaim lo nidrana. Maybe you're saying, in other words, when you say kinidre rishaim, this is our whole goal in Masechet Nidarim, is to try to figure out what did I mean when I said something. So we assumed if I said like the vow of an evildoer, then I'm basically nadar b'nazir b'korban or b'shvua. That means I'm taking upon a neder. Why might it not mean like the nidrei rishaim? I'm not taking a vow. And why you would do such a thing? Maybe someone's trying to have you take a vow, and you say, "I will not take a vow." That's like bad people do it. Because the truth is, it's a very good question. If I really want to take on a vow, why on earth would I say it in the language of the wicked? Even if I am doing it maybe for the wrong reasons, I wouldn't want to say that in words. It seems a little bit strange. It would seem more like I'm saying, I don't want to be like wicked people. I'm not making a neder like they do. So therefore, Shmuel is forced to say, Amar Shmuel, Be'omer kinidrei rashaim hareini. You have to say some sort of word that affirms what you're doing, as opposed to saying, I will not, right? Which might have been the simple reading. So he said, the simple understanding. So he says it must be, just like he said earlier, there's no such thing as mudrani mimcha, even though the Mishnah sounded like there was, without saying shani uchalecha or shani toem lecha. Likewise here, it's not going to be that you're taking on a neder of Rishayim if you say the word kinidrei Rishayim by itself, those words by themselves. You would have to say kinidrei Rishayim, for example, hareini, I am, which would mean basically I'm a Nazir. Alai, on me, or hemenu, from it. So now the Gemara is going to explain. Hareini b'nizirut. If you say the word kinidrei Rishayim, like the vows of the wicked, I will be, then what you're basically saying is, I will be a Nazir. In another minute, we're going to say you even need something more than that. Alai b'korban. If you say alai, it's going to be upon me, then it's b'korban. Then it means you're taking upon yourself a korban, because alai is the language we usually use as a neder, right? On me, this animal. Hey manu, if you say from it, you mean b'shvuah. What you're basically saying is, I'm not going to eat this. You're taking an oath. So now the Gemara says, hareini nizirut, 1 minute. You say the word hareini, that means you're going to be a nazir. Dilma hareini b'ta'anit kamar. Maybe you mean, I'm going to take upon myself a fast. I'm going to be fasting. Alai means, right, something I'm going to do, but maybe it means fasting. Amar Shmuel, so Shmuel has to say even more. Kishaya nazir ober lefanav. This is the situation. Not only is Shmuel adding words to the Mishnah, he's adding details to the situation. And now we're going to go through all the cases according to this. Basically, you're standing on the street. You see a Nazir walking by, and you say, Kinidrei Rishayim Hareini. Basically saying, I'm going to do like the Neders of the wicked. And I see this Nazir. That means on Hareini, I will be. And the Nazir is walking by. That's what we call hatpasa. You're connecting it to something that's already forbidden, already a Nazir, and you're saying, I want to be like him. If you say, Hareini, Kinidre, Rishayim alai, it must be there was an animal in front of you, and then you're basically taking the animal upon yourself to bring to the temple. If there was food in front of you, then you're basically saying, all right, you say, Kinidre, Rishayim, hemenu, from it, but I will not eat this, and then it turns into an oath of, I will not eat something. Okay? Why they turn into an oath, and you couldn't have been a neder that you're talking about on the food? It's a good question, but it seems they assume this is the language of a shvua, that I swear I won't eat this. So now they say the following. So the first question was, why are you assuming when we say hareini, I will be, that you mean I will be a nadir, not I will be in a fast? Or, for example, it could have been all sorts of things. So they say it must have been the nazir was walking before you. Hemenu b'shvua, dilma hemenu da'achil nakama. If you say there's food in front of you, and you say, hemenu, from it, maybe you mean from it I will eat, and not from it I will not eat. Why are we assuming it means I will eat, and not I will not? Why do we assume it means I will not eat? Maybe it means I will eat. Amarava de'amal hemenu shelo ochal. Must be, again, Shmuel's adding words here. It wasn't enough to say you added the word hemenu. It wasn't enough that the food was in front of you, and therefore it was clear you were referring to the food. You also have to say hemenu shelo ochal. So now we've added, instead of 2 words, Kinidrei Rishayim, you now have to say 5 words to make this happen. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. If you've said, Kinidrei Rishayim, hemenu shelo ochal, like the vows of the wicked, from this I will not eat, what's the Mishnah teaching us? It's obvious. You said all the words that mean I'm not going to eat. Forget about the Nidrei Rishayim, right? Even if you didn't have that, this would be a vow. So, or a net, or a shvua, really. It would be a shvua, because again, now we see why they made it the language of a shvua, shelo ochal, that I will not eat. So now they say, ma'u detema halo mapik shvua mipume, but you didn't use the language of a shvua. Again, it's all about the wording. You never said the word shvua here. You actually even used the word language of a vow. Kamash malan, and then some people get rid of the words hadem, which makes more sense. Kamash malan, this Mishnah comes to teach you, even if you didn't use the language of a shvua, you've made a shvua here. This is considered an oath. So the first part was to basically understand how just the words Kinidrei Rishayim could actually be effective, to which Shmuel basically doesn't believe those words on their own are effective, because it wouldn't be clear what you meant, it wouldn't be clear what you were referring to, it wouldn't be clear whether you meant yes or no. So you would have to add more words And it would have to be a situation where there was something in front of you that you were relating to that would make sense, whether it's going to be Nazir that you mean, Korban, that you were meant to make this animal was going to be a sacrifice, or you meant not to eat the following foods. So therefore, we've already explained the Mishnah, not exactly in its simple reading. And again, I think it's interesting to compare Shmuel in the first part of the Mishnah to Shmuel in this part of the Mishnah, which again, similar approach, which Shmuel seems to think that saying a shorter phrase that's not so clear is not going to be so effective. Whereas again, there could be other interpretations here. Now we're going to deal with the second part. Kinidrek sherim lo amar klum, but b'nidvotam it would work, right? If you said a neder, then it doesn't work. If you say like the nidava of the Rishayim, then it would work. So instead of asking what's the difference, the Gemara asks it a little bit differently, and from there gets into what's the difference between neder and nidava. Man Tana deshane le ben neder lenidava. Who's the Tana who distinguishes between a neder and a nidava? Okay, classic question of the Gemara, which is we have a Mishnah. It's a Tanaitic source. It clearly holds by one of two of the following Tanaim who actually talk about this topic. Here, they're not going to actually talk about the topic because we would have expected someone to talk about the difference between neder and nidava. Here, what they want to say is because this source talks about are nidarim good or bad, which is the topic of our Mishnah, basically, do ksherim take these vows or do rishaim, bad people, take these vows? So because of that, we assume that one of them is going to relate to the difference between neder and nidava and make this distinction the Mishnah is making. And basically, we're going to show neither of them makes this distinction. And then we're going to be stuck. And today's daf, we're going to try to figure it all out according to Rabbi Meir. And in tomorrow's daf, they're going to suggest a way to read the Mishnah according to Rabbi Yehuda. And then within each of them, we're going to have a difference between what's the difference between neder and nidava. So with that comment about the structure, let's go into the content. Lema lo Rabbi Meir v'lo Rabbi Yehuda. It sounds like it doesn't match Rabbi Meir, it doesn't match Rabbi Yehuda. Tanya, as it says in the following bright. Tov asher lo tidol. This is a pasuk I made mention of in the beginning of the Masechet, a pasuk from Kohelet, very important for our Masechet because it says, chapter 5, verses 3 to 4, Kashir tidor neder l'Elohim, when you make a vow to God, al ta'acher l'shalmo, this sounds like the pasuk in the Torah, don't delay bringing it, ki en chefetz baksilim, et asher tidor shalem. God doesn't want foolish people who make foolish statements and don't keep to them, right, or delay them. What you take a vow for, you have to pay. You have to do it to fulfill. Tov asher lo tidor, but better not to make a neder at all, misha tidor velo teshalem, than to make a vow and not keep it. Now notice what it says there. It says you shouldn't really, right? If you take a vow, don't delay. God doesn't want, right? You have to keep your vows. And better not to take a vow than to take a vow and not keep it. So it sounds like maybe vows are okay as long as you keep to them. But on that issue, there's going to be a debate, to which Rabbi Meir says, Tov mizeh u'mizeh, right? It says here, Tov asher lo tidol, better not to take a neder than to take a vow and not keep it. He says, better than that is she'eino noder kol ikar. Right? It sounds like it's good if you keep your vow, right? The opposite of that is, and if we, that better not to vow than to vow and not pay up. But if you vow and pay up, it's okay. Comes Rabbi Meir and he says, well, it's true if you take a vow and you keep your vow, that's good. But even better than that is not to take a vow at all. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Tov mizeh u'mizeh, no deru meshalem. No, Rabbi Yehuda says it's an ideal to take a vow and to keep it. That's actually a really good thing. The best level. So they have an argument about what's the highest level. Rabbi Meir says better not to take vows at all. That's just not a good thing. Rabbi Yehuda says better, right? The best is if you take a vow and you keep it. That's actually looked at as very positive. Now this goes back to the whole question of are vows good or not good, right? And obviously our mission is going to be our Gemara on our mission is going to be discussing that because it's exactly the language you're using, like a neder of wicked people, like the neder of good people. It sounds from the Mishnah, and that's why they're going to try to go with Rabbi Meir here, because Rabbi Meir does see. Now, what's the problem? Neither Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Yehuda distinguishes between neder and nidava. That's the problem. Rabbi Meir says better not to make a neder at all, and he doesn't say nidavot are good. So how we get in the Mishnah to nidrei ksherim or nidvot ksherim are okay? And Rabbi Yehuda says it's good to take a neder, which would sound like Also not our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says it's bad to take a neder, because if you say nidrei ksherim, there is no such thing. It doesn't mean anything. Right? So the Mishnah supposes, right? The assumption of the Mishnah is evildoers, bad, wicked people, they take vows. Good people don't take vows, but good people do take nidavot. Okay, which again, we're going to have to figure out what's the difference between neder and nidavot. Right? We have this hare zo, hare alai. That's one distinction, but what's the meaning of that distinction? Why would that mean that one is good and one is bad? They seem to me pretty, right? They seem to us pretty arbitrary, whether you say this is upon me or I will take upon myself, like this animal or on myself. It shouldn't really make a difference whether good people do it or not. So we have a lot of questions at this point. So the Gemara says, first explanation, again, our next, on the top of Yud Amud Aleph, they're going to say the exact opposite, which is, I can explain according to Rabbi Yehuda. Now they're going to basically say, I can explain according to Rabbi Meir. Afilu tema Rabbi Meir. Afilu tema is a language that means, even if you want to say, okay, usually it's used a little bit differently. This is another good example of where language in Nedarim is used differently. The same words, sometimes they use different words to mean the same thing, like teku and tibaile. This is an example where afilu tema is used in a bit of a different manner. Afilu tema is usually when we have two opinions and our Braita or Mishnah or whatever Tanaitic source, we say it's obvious this goes according to one side and not the other, to which the response is, well, you can even say the other way. In this case, we're using it to say, I think it works with this opinion, or you could say, okay? But it's not a response to, I thought it went with this opinion, and now I'm going to explain to you it goes by the other. So it's a different usage of afilu tema than appears in other places. It makes this Masechah a little tricky, because if you do start learning all these terms and how they're used, in Nedarim they're used a little differently than the typical usage. But it's not so different, because it still really means that I can explain the Mishnah according to this opinion. So afilu tema Rabbi Meir, moving out Amud Bet, ki ka'ama Rabbi Meir beneder, benedava lo ka'amal. So you could just simply say, we're looking for someone who distinguishes between neder and nidava. Neither of them did that. So comes the Gemara and says, why don't you just say, the Rabbi Meir said Nedarim were bad. That fits with our Mishnah. Nidrei Rishaim works, Nidrei Ksherim doesn't work. What about the fact that Nidava appears in our Mishnah as a positive thing, that Ksherim do take Nidavot upon themselves? Well, Rabbi Meir, in that Braita, just wasn't dealing with Nidava. If you had asked him about Nidava, he would have told you that I like, good people do take Nidavot. And Nidava is a good thing, but they just didn't ask him. He wasn't talking about it. That just wasn't what was going on in that Braita. So that's the first way to understand. Now, we still don't really understand. We still have a few questions. Number one, this you might not have thought about, but Hakatane, look at the words of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Bidkin nidvotam, if you say like the nidava, like the voluntary offering of ksherim, of good people, nadal benazir ubekorban. You took upon yourself a neder to be a nazir or to bring a sacrifice. Now, if we just said there's no such thing as a neder, or we don't think a neder of ksherim is such a thing, because we don't think ksherim should take nedarim, then why did it use the language of neder? And it was talking about nidava. I mean, in general, it's a bit strange. It should have said nadav bekorban or b'shvuah or b'nazir bekorban, sorry. To which the Gemara says, okay, so just switch the word nadar to nadav. First of all, it's not such a crazy switch. If things are passed down orally, the end of words, sometimes people mumble and there could have been some misinterpretation here. It's just resh to a bet, right? Switching it. So also you could say maybe it was said nun dalid with a chupchik if you're talking about in writing, it was passed down, or they got confused between the resh and the bet, which don't look so different. So anyway, it's not such a crazy change. Tanei nadav b'nazir b'korban. It should be, if you say like the nidava rishayim, then you basically volunteered an offering as a nidava, either to be a nazir or to bring a sacrifice. So now the Gemara gets to a more basic question, which is our question, which is Maishna Noder Delo. What's the reason why Nedarim aren't good for, why good people won't take vows? And that's because Dilma Ati Bali De Takala, because it adds possibility for error, right? Good people don't try to get themselves into situations where they might not be able to fulfill, right? That's why I saw someone asking, why do we say bli neder? This is why we say bli neder, because you don't want to accept upon yourself. If you accept upon yourself something, and then you can't do it, you went against the Torah law of bal yachil dvaro, don't not keep to your word. Or let's say you do it, but you do it very late, right? You've pushed it off. You might have a problem of Baal Ta'acher, which is don't delay in bringing your vow. So basically, this is prone to problems, right? We all know that life comes in the way and we always commit to things. And then, right, this is why people don't like to commit, because you don't want to have to be held to your word. So that makes sense. But then, Nedava Nami, what's the difference if you use a different language? Harezo, Hare Alai, what does it really matter? Nedava also, Dilma Atabali de Takala. Nedava has the same issue. You can't delay bringing it. You have to keep to your word. So I don't understand the difference. Now, they're going to bring an example by sacrifices. Then they're going to question, well, what about by Nazir? This is a good example for sacrifice. What about Nazir? And they're going to explain. There's going to be two approaches to understand how this actually answers the question and why this is actually different. So I'll explain. But right now in the Gemara, there's one answer to each, but the question is why, what does it really mean? So we'll read it and then we'll explain in two different ways. Ki Hillel hazaken, like Hillel the elder. What do we see about Hillel? Dear Tanya, as it says in a Braita, Amru al Hillel hazaken, shelo ma'al adam ba'olato kol yamav. Nobody was transgressed the sin of Me'ila, which is misuse of consecrated property, with the Korban Ola all the days of his life. Why? What usually happens? You sanctify something. You take an animal. I'm going to bring this to the temple. You say, this is going to be, right, Hare Alai or Hare Zo. Okay, so that's going to be maybe one of the reasons for the difference here. This animal will be for me. Let's say you say Hare Zo. This animal will be for me. That would be a Nedava. Now, if you do that, and then before you get to the temple, somebody might not know that it was sanctified, somebody in your family, they might use the animal for some reason, so you would have a problem. Well, in his day, he avoided that problem. How so? He would say to everyone, you want to bring an animal as a nedava, what do? Bring it, not sanctify. Don't sanctify it right away. Don't say, I'm bringing this animal to the temple. First, just bring it to the temple. When you get to the temple, makdisha, sanctify it, and immediately somech alav v'shochata, you do smicha on the animal, and then you slaughter it. These are the parts of the sacrifice that you do, the stages, and then you won't have an issue because you won't have anybody misuse it outside the temple, so you won't have any sort of problem. So now they say that basically explains why nedava can be done by ksherim, because there's a way to do it where you avoid all sorts of problems. Now, why can't neder work in that way? Why can't you bring the animal while you're in the temple? You say, Hare alai, I'm going to bring this animal as a sacrifice. That still doesn't necessarily protect you from not making a mistake. In other words, here we're basically saying that as soon as you bring it to, right, when it's in the temple, you sanctify it, and then you immediately go through the steps. But with a neder, since you basically assumed responsibility, that achrayut, which means if something would happen to that animal, you would be responsible to bring a different one instead, that could still happen in the temple. In other words, you won't have a problem of me'ila, of someone outside not realizing it was sanctified, because you're all in the temple now, and obviously it's clear you sanctified it, and there's no time really to have anyone misuse it and be confused about its status. But if it's a neder, theoretically, again, maybe you'd say this is a off chance this would happen, but maybe the animal will drop dead right there. The animal drops dead right there. If it's a nedava, we don't have to worry about it because you said this animal is sanctified. You don't have to bring an animal in instead. But if you say alai, on me, and a neder, you could actually have a problem that the animal dies, and then you still have this chance of atilidei takala, because you'll have to leave the temple, go find another animal, maybe you'll forget, maybe you'll get distracted, maybe you won't do it, and then you have all the problems. So nedava, if you do it in this way, the Hillel HaZaken did it, you can avoid the problems of the takalot that could possibly happen, and therefore nedava could work for a kasher. This is a good way to do it. A neder is less good to do because you can always have a problem. Now, also nedava could have a problem, but that's if you don't do it like Hillel HaZaken. Here we have a method where it can be done properly. So one explanation is to say neder is different from nedava because what they're trying to say here is a neder could possibly lead to some problem, even if you did it in the way of Hillel HaZaken, where the way Hillel HaZaken did it protected us specifically in nedavot. Some people say, and the proof is more the next section, is that it's really about how you do it. And it's not so much because you said arei zeh, arei alai, but here we see an example with a nedava where it was done with the proper intent and the proper precautions were taken, and it's the way you do it rather than how you do it, or what words you use. But it's specifically that the neder is more. And if you think about it, if you use the words, let's take the translation. There's vows, and then there's voluntary or gift offerings. It sounds too different, right? A vow sounds a little bit of a negative connotation. You have to take a vow. A gift offering is something that sounds, or a voluntary offering, something totally volunteer, right? The word nadev, to volunteer, comes from nidava. So that usually is a very positive connotation. So it could be also that it has to do more with not necessarily this technical harei zo harei alai, but what your intent was and why you did it and how you did it. Kind of, you did it in this good way where you were protecting from all sorts of other things. Again, like I said, the next story where we get to, well, what about Nazir? Because you don't have harei zo harei alai when it comes to Nazir. So what's the situation between neder and nedava? The answer here is going to more side with the second interpretation, that it's not necessarily because harei zo harei alai, but it's more how you decided to do. So hanicha nedava de korbanot. That makes sense. Hanicha always means this makes sense, like Noach, it's comfortable. That makes sense when you're talking about nedava of a korban, of a sacrifice. Nedava de nazirut ma'ikal memra. But what's the difference between l'nadev nazirut, to volunteer to be a nazir, or to vow to be a nazir? It's all really one and the same. So he says, sever like a Shimon HaTzadik. He held like Shimon HaTzadik. Who's Shimon HaTzadik? What's the story about him? So, Tanya, as it says in the following, Braita, Amar Shimon HaTzadik, he was a Kohen. Now, Kohanim eat the meat of certain sacrifices. Certain sacrifices, like a Korban Shlamim, a peace offering, that the owner of the sacrifice, whoever brings it, gets to eat the meat. But there's other sacrifices. For example, we're going to talk today about an Asham, also a Chatat, sin offerings or guilt offerings, that the Kohanim eat the meat of, not the owner. The owner who brought it doesn't eat the meat, but the Kohen eats the meat. So came Shimon HaTzadik and he said the following. One of the sacrifices the Nazir has to bring, if a Nazir becomes impure during the days of the Nizirut, what he has to do is, or she has to do, is bring 3 sacrifices after Nazir. You have to go through the purifying yourself. Then you bring, among other things, you bring 3 sacrifices. One of them is a guilt offering because you did something wrong by becoming impure to a dead body, which you're not allowed to do when you're a Nazir. And then you have to start counting your Nazirut from the beginning. So if we say that Stam Nazirut, the average Nazirut is 30 days, then we say basically, okay, so start your 30 days all over again once you became pure. So right now we're going to talk about this Asham Nazir. He said, I never was willing to eat the meat of an Asham Nazir, Tameh, right, of a Nazir who became impure and had to bring a guilt offering. El Echad. There was only one person who became impure when they were Nazir that I was willing to eat the meat of their sacrifice. Why? Well, let's hear the story. One day, a man came to the temple. He was a Nazir from the south. I saw a beautiful eye. He was beautiful, very handsome man. And he had these curls, like this beautiful black curly hair. Martilo. Actually, it doesn't say black, but he had these beautiful long curls. Amartilo, Beni. Said to him, why do you want to destroy this beautiful hair that you have? Amarli, I was a roetzon, I was a shepherd for my father in the city, in my city. I went to the water, to the lake or the river or wherever it was, to draw, the Mayan, the spring. I went to the spring to draw water. And I looked at my reflection in the water. This reminds us a little bit of the story of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan sees Rish Lakish's reflection in the water, sees how beautiful, Rish Lakish sees Rabbi Yochanan's reflection in the water, sees how beautiful Rabbi Yochanan is, dives in after him, right? And then Rabbi Yochanan sees his power, how strong he was. And he said, why don't you move that over to Torah instead of what you're doing? Anyway, here he says, I looked at my reflection in the water. My Yetzer Hara got the better of me. All different interpretations. Did that mean he wanted to go chase women? Did it mean he just thought of himself as God's gift to the world, and that was his sin? All different options about what exactly went wrong here. Ubikesh the Tardeni min ha'olam, and my Yetzer, my evil inclination, wanted to basically take me out of this world. Amartilo, so I said to my Yetzer, my evil inclination, Rasha, lama atam mitge'eh ba'olam she'eino shelcha. You evil person, why are you trying to be so haughty in a world that's not yours? You're just going to end up being nothing, right? I figured out how to translate that, but nothing in the ground, like worms. Ha'avodah, I swear, she'agalechecha l'shamayim. And he immediately swears, I'm going to shave off my head, l'shamayim, to God. This is viewed as a good type of nizirut. This is said, look, this came from a really good place. Again, it's not exactly the best place, but it's saying that someone who came to recognition of God through this and decided from there to basically go and sacrifice his hair and his beauty, right? Give it up to God. Miyad amadati u'nishakti, I'll show back to Shimon HaTzadik. He immediately gets up, kisses him on the head. Amarti lo b'ni kamocha yirbu nizirei nizirut b'Yisrael. I wish there were more Nizirim like you in the world. Okay, apparently the other Nizirim that he saw were taking it upon themselves for the wrong reasons, not really l'shem shamayim. Okay, we don't know exactly why they were, but not for the sake of God. Alecha katuv omer, the pasuk for you. This is the pasuk for you. This pasuk is referring to you. Ish ki afli lindor neder nazir lahazir l'Hashem. You're the one that the Torah was talking about, a person who takes on Nizirim. You see, the Shimon HaTzadik is very upset with the Nizirim of his generation, but this one is good. So now, again, let's go back to what we were trying to explain. What's the difference between a neder and a nedava? According to this, it's not about harei alai, harei zo. What it is it's this idea that there's a way to do things. Okay, like my house was always, it's your tone of voice. It's how you say it. It's how you do it. You could do the same thing. You could be a nazir, but if you do it, or you can bring a korban, but if you do it with the right precautions, in the right way, with the right frame of mind, that's very different. So Hillel HaZaken and Shimon HaTzadik, according to one interpretation, reflect this difference in terms of their kavanah, their intent, their ratzon, how they wanted to do it was l'shem shamayim. Alternatively, you could go back to this harei zeh, harei alai, but that's very difficult to explain in terms of, right, it works very well with the korban, it doesn't work as well with the nazir story. Now we just have a side question, and from there we'll finish for today. And then, as I told you, we'll go back tomorrow to give a different interpretation of who does the Mishnah go by, and then through that we'll have to explain how does he see the difference to Rabbi Yehuda between neder and nedava in the Mishnah. Matkefla Rabbi Nen. We have this side question on this story, something they didn't understand. Ma'ishna asham nazir tamei delo achal. Why didn't he want to eat the asham of a nazir who became impure? Presumably the ate al chet, because it came because someone did something wrong and he didn't want to have any involvement in wrongdoing. Well, if that's the case, why specifically did he say, I won't eat the asham of a nazir shenitma? He shouldn't eat any guilt offering. All the guilt offerings came because of sins. So why did he highlight specifically the nazir? Amrle Rabbi Yonah says no. This is the reason. Hainu tam. This is the reason. Kishehem tohim nozlim. Now, tohim, it's unclear what it means here, like tohim from the lashon of tov avo, the world was chaos, right? In a moment of chaos, okay, the Rashi says, with a Rashi on the daf, not really Rashi, but mitpachadim, they do it out of fear. It comes from some sort of a bad place, okay? They're lost, they don't know what to do, so they said, let's just take upon ourselves a neder. By the way, if you don't remember, we talked about at the beginning of the Masechet, one reason the Nidarim are viewed as bad is because this idea is that God decides what we can and can't do. And he already prohibited so many things that why should we, right? We shouldn't be adding our own things to the list, right? Now, what he's saying here is these people were kind of lost, wandering, were scared of something or whatever motivated them, was from a bad place. And because of that, they took on Nizirut. Okay, so what? Well, Keshahim mitam'in, now remember, we're talking about a Nazir, they became impure. And what did I tell you? They have to start counting from the beginning after they become impure. Well, if you took on your Nizirut because you were just kind of wandering, waffling, or were upset about something, or somehow you got into this, but not really for the right reasons, when you became impure, v'ravin alehem, you made Nizirut, and all of a sudden you have to add on extra days. You planned on 30 days, and now all of a sudden you have to do another 30 days. Well, let's say you said, I'm going to be a Nazir for a year, and now you have to start the count all over again. Mitchartim bahem. They regret that they did it. And if they regret that they did it, it's, now here it's a big question. Is it or it's as if, okay? If they have remorse and they don't think that they really wanted to be a Nazir in the first place at this point, then they somewhat, okay, whether it's completely undo, it's a good question. There's a debate among the commentaries. What this means, the language seems to say they are bringing chulin la'azara. That means that this korban was never meant to be bought. Because if I have charata and I never really wanted to take on the Nazirut in the first place. And now that I realize what I'm getting myself into, which I didn't think about at the time, because I was acting out of an impulse, right? You can maybe say Tohim is also like out of impulsivity. I on impulse said I'm going to be a Nazir. Now I realize what I've got myself into, that now I have to do it even longer than I thought. Well, I'm going to have remorse. I'm not going to really have wanted to do it in the first place. And that means that basically either I wasn't a Nazir in the first place, and now that I'm bringing this Asham Nazir, it actually is not, it's chulin, it's non-sacred. You can't just bring an Asham if you want to. And if you weren't really a Nazir to begin with, then you're not really obligated an Asham. Most people don't interpret it like that, ad kedei kach, to that extent that you really undid your Nizirut. But that it's as if you undid your Nizirut, okay? You didn't really, you can't just undo your Nizirut by saying, oh, I wish I hadn't done this. But it's almost as if you're saying, you're thinking, I really wish I wasn't a Nazir, which is as if, I don't want to have anything to do, he says, with these korbanot Hashem of the Nazir Tameh, because I have a feeling that they don't really mean it anymore. And when they bring it, they already kind of, at least want to undo their Nizirut, even if they haven't actually. And it's like bringing Chulin L'Azara. To which the Gemara asks, Yihachi, Afilu Nazir Tahor Nami, maybe a regular Nazir is mitcharet. In other words, maybe we should have this issue with anybody. To which they say, Nazir Tahor Lo, the Amude Amid Nafshe Diachol Lindol. In other words, a good person who takes on Nizirut, like this person with Shimon HaTzadik, knows from the beginning, they do it for the right reasons, and then they know what's involved, and it doesn't bother them if something were to happen in the middle, and they would have to count more days. They wouldn't have this issue. And that's why he was willing to eat the asham of the other one, but not the asham of this, of anyone else because of this concern. So that resolved that issue. Again, we saw these two, Hillel HaZaken and the Shimon HaTzadik story, which explained to us how you can have Nizirut and Korbanot that are different from the typical. And that's why, and those are more like Nidava, and that's why Nidavat Ksherim is something, but Neder of Ksherim is nothing. That explained our Mishnah, at least according to Rabbi Meir. We'll have to wait till tomorrow to hear Rabbi Yehuda. Wishing everybody a great day, and we'll meet up tomorrow.